Hello, welcome to Theology Thursday. Today we're going to deal with it, a subject that brings out a lot of passion in people, and unfortunately leads sometimes to arguments. And that's the subject of guns in the Bible, Christians and guns. Now, before I get into it, I do want to give a caveat. Those who know me know that I enjoy shooting guns. In fact, this is one of my favorite ones right here. This is a Smith & Wesson M&P 357. It is unloaded for today. This is the gun I usually carry in my vehicles, loaded. Probably my favorite handgun to shoot. And so I just need to let that be known that I am pro-gun personally. And we'll get into some of that discussion in a little bit. But first I want to talk about, what does the Bible say about guns and Christians? Nothing. Guns were not invented when the Bible was written. Neither was the internet, so the Bible doesn't say anything about that either. So when we deal with subjects like this, we have to kind of go back and ask ourselves, okay, what principles do we find from the Bible? So the real question is, what does the Bible say about weapons and Christians? And there is quite a bit about that. So I want to deal with the biblical issues, then some practical issues for Christians in America. But in the Bible, I want to look at it under three broad categories. The first category is that of self-defense, life protection. Of all the passages in the Bible, there's one that seems to be pretty clear about self-defense in Exodus 22. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there will be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he will be sold for his theft. And so if someone's broken in your house and you do something to protect yourself, you strike him. Assumption is you strike him with a club or a sword or whatever it is that you would have had in your house in those days. Maybe it meant hit him with your fists, but regardless, you've struck him hard enough, and probably I would assume in the head area, that he has died. You're not guilty. You did not know his intentions when he broke in. Was it just to take a few things, grab some money and run, or was it to do harm to you or to your family? And so you are justified in defending yourself and your family if someone has broken into your house. If he came in to steal and he didn't die, that's what it means if he survives till the morning, the sun comes up. So if he survives, then he has to pay you for damage to the house and anything that he stole or broke. And if he can't afford to do that, then he has to work it off. That means sold him as a slave. I don't think you just sold him off for the rest of his life, but basically it's an economic deal. He had to work off of what he owed. And so self-defense is very clearly taught in Exodus 22. Someone breaking into your home, it's fine. In the modern world, you probably wouldn't use a sword. I mean, you might use a baseball bat rather than a club. But you very well may use a gun, and again, that would be acceptable because it falls within the parameters of Exodus 22. As a matter of fact, Jesus said when you're traveling, your self-preservation is a very high priority. You say, well, why do you say that? Well, in Luke chapter 22, verse 36, Jesus said to them, "But now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one." Now, in the Roman world, there's no concern. This is not a battle deal, no concern about invasion by enemies. Certainly in Jesus' day, there were insurrections. But when you would travel, the roads, as we call them, many of them outside of a few main artery roads that the Romans had built, were pretty much just paths that people had walked. And so if you're going to be traveling, there were a lot of places to be ambushed by robbers. And so as you travel, you would take a sword with you, obviously, to protect yourself. This isn't to go into battle. It's not what he's talking about. He's talking about if you're carrying some money as an offering or something, or in your knapsack with your food and things in it. There are no motels, no Circle Ks or anything. So you had to mostly carry that. For your self-defense, for your self-preservation, you were to take a sword. So when it comes to self-defense, the Bible is pretty explicitly clear that it is acceptable to use not just force, but even lethal force. So the use of a gun in self-defense is acceptable in the Bible. Now, what about extension beyond that? What about like other people. And I don't mean like protecting your family, someone breaking in, but you're in a situation and you see person A assaulting person B. Is it acceptable in that case to step in and to defend someone else? Well, here's what the Bible has to say about that. In Psalm 82:3-4, give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. So actually, the Bible has a lot to say about caring for people that are oftentimes the objects of folks trying to take advantage of them, abuse them, mistreat them. But this is an actual verse that seems to indicate, man, you can step in and use force to protect someone else's life. And not just the someone else being like your family, but you see someone else and you step in and aid them. And there are plenty of YouTube videos of things like this happening, not always lethal force. As a matter of fact, it may be that all you have to do is simply pull out a firearm and someone who is assaulting someone else will stop because the presence of a firearm is intimidating enough to get them to stop. In that case, you don't shoot them when they're running away. So the use of a weapon is certainly acceptable for the protection of someone else. I mean, how in the world can you love someone? We're supposed to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the first commandment. And to love your neighbor as yourself is the second commandment. How can you love your neighbor if you don't step in and attempt to protect and preserve what could potentially be a life-threatening assault? And so to protect someone else is also acceptable according to Scripture. So those are the first two biblical cases that would affect us personally, like carrying a firearm, self-defense, whether someone's breaking the home or I'm traveling or whatever the case may be. If I'm out in public, Jesus addresses that. And then also to step in and help protect someone else. But there's a third category that sometimes arises when it comes to the Bible and weapons and violent, lethal force. And that is in the exercise of governmental duty, which falls into several categories, but we'll just look at two of those. One is military, and the other obviously is like police officers, first responders, that kind of thing. So the Bible does address the issue of military. Psalm 144:1, blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. That God prepares me for war. The Bible's full of warfare. I have a different Theology Thursday on warfare, so I'm not going to discuss that here. You can go back and find that one and look at it if you want to. But certainly, under the authority of the state, to send you into battle and for you to perform and to even use lethal force if necessary is biblically acceptable. Under the authority that is given to the state, Romans 13 says they have the authority of the sword, which in our case probably would be a gun. And so the use of firearms as in the military or as a police, certainly as a police officer, oftentimes will fall under the second category, the protection of someone's life. And so a police officer using lethal force is certainly authorized in Scripture. But of course, that lethal force would be necessary to protect or preserve someone or in self-defense. And some officers have been convicted of using excessive force, which I don't want to get into today. We're just considering what does the Bible have to say. So that part is all pretty easy and straightforward for the most part. But now I want to deal with something else just briefly for a moment if I could, and that is the question of gun laws. The right to defend yourself with a firearm certainly seems to be very biblical, particularly from Exodus 22, in a self-defense status or protecting of someone else's life certainly seems to be acceptable according to Scripture. Something that I assume very few, if any of you watching this, will ever be involved, but if you are not guilty before God. But the issue comes up, what about the government? Now, I live in the United States of America, so I'm only going to deal with American law and not consider what goes on in other countries. The Constitution of the United States does not guarantee any rights. the Constitution of the United States recognizes God-given rights. And so they're not technically constitutional rights. They are natural rights that have been ensconced in the Constitution. And one of those, as I'm sure you're aware of, is the Second Amendment, which is, in order to have a well-established militia, the right to keep and to bear arms. And I won't get into what all that means, and original intent and all that. That's for somewhere else. But the question comes, what about Christians? And if there's a law passed that bans guns or that we feel is unconstitutional, to protest is your right. Again, under the Constitution, we do have a freedom of speech, and we do have the freedom of assembly. And the freedom of assembly is primarily in order to protest the government, because the British didn't want U.S. citizens gathering together and planning what would become the War of Independence. And so we have those rights. And so I think it's fine if you want to exercise those rights. But we need to remember as Christians that arguing for particular gun rights, whether or not you have the right to open carry or conceal carry without a permit, or whether or not you're allowed to have a silencer on your gun, or how large a magazine, depending on what a particular state issues, is not actually a biblical issue. Now it becomes, I will be a conscientious objector if I feel like it's violating my Christian conscience. And so I think we need to be very careful that we distinguish between rights as Americans and dealing with legal American issues versus what are clearly biblical issues. And so I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this video because I know I'll get a ton of emails and responses and for and against, and I don't care what they say, they'll have to come take my gun from my cold dead fingers and all that, and I'm thrilled for you, Rambo Juniors. But I do think we need to, in many cases, ask ourselves, is this something I disagree with, but I disagree with it as an American citizen, as opposed to I disagree with it as a Christian? And I think if I disagree with it as a Christian, who have some very clear biblical support for my position, we should be willing to oppose the government. If, on the other hand, this is a strong opinion that I have, and I do have very strong opinions about the government's overreach in limiting gun ownership and gun usage and tracking us and all of that. But the reality is those are Paul Smith American values, not specifically Paul Smith Christian values. And this applies not only in guns, but to a lot of areas as well. And so I think as Christians, we need to work through some of that and think about that. What positions do I hold that are biblical that I can't waver on? Because that's my highest commitments to God, even above government. And where do I maybe have to say, okay, I don't agree with that, but I'll comply because it's not really a biblical issue. This is my position as an American citizen, my right to hold this, but also recognition of my need to follow the law. So I just want to kind of set some of those issues off to the side because they're American citizen issues, not really biblical issues. Instead, I just want to focus on the biblical issues. So let me go back and recap quickly. It is okay to own a gun biblically because they owned weapons. Jesus said carry a sword, which was the most common weapon of their day. It is okay to use a firearm in self-defense. It is okay to use a firearm in the protection of others. And it is okay to use a firearm in the execution of one's duties as a member of the military or a member of first responders, police officers, or sheriffs, or whatever it is. Those are all biblically justified. Beyond that, I think some of those become American citizen issues, not Christian issues. So I know this is a very touchy subject for many people, but I do want to address it and hope that in some ways this will help you. And I would encourage you, as Jesus said, sell your cloak and buy a sword. Be prepared to protect your own life because you are made in the image of God, and to protect the lives of others who are made in God's image as well. So God bless you, and I hope you have a fantastic day.